Hey everybody, welcome back to Leosophy. This video is sort of a follow-up to the pain video in that I'm addressing three terms that I often hear people get confused, and they particularly use these in arguments regarding ethics, especially animal ethics. And that would be sentience, self-awareness, and sapience. Those are three very different things. They're not remotely the same term. There's a lot of overlap. We could probably make a Venn diagram of it, but they're not the same thing. And it's important to acknowledge that. Let me start with the least interesting of the bunch, or perhaps a better term would be the broadest of the bunch, and that's sentience. Sentience applies to pretty much every vertebrate, and I would say, and this is where things do become debatable, most invertebrates. Sentience just means you're aware of your surroundings. You're using sensory perception in order to acquire data from your environment and make decisions based on that data. That's really what it is. Some people, they narrow it down and say that sentience requires an emotional awareness of sensory perception. Like, for example, if I burn my hand, obviously I'm going to pull my hand away, but then I'm also going to be in pain, and I'm going to be unhappy that I'm in pain. Conversely, if, let's say, a beetle burns its foot on a hot surface, it will also recoil. It will pull its foot back, but then it'll put all its weight on that foot, no problem. It will not be in pain, and it will not, at least from what we can perceive, appear to be distressed or unhappy. So that's where things become, that's where we start splitting hairs regarding what sentience applies to. To reiterate, all vertebrates that I can think of, sentience applies. And cephalopods, sentience applies. These are animals that do illustrate, even by the narrowest definitions, responses and emotional reactions to certain stimuli. Where it becomes more questionable is if an invertebrate, let's say an insect, flees from a predator, flees from a pain response, or not a pain response, but a mechanical damage response. Is that sentience? I would say yes, but I don't really think it's a huge point of contention, because at that level, then you're just arguing about the semantics of the word. Rather, anyone would acknowledge that every animal uses senses to interpret its environment and gauge whether they're in a good scenario or a bad scenario, gauge whether they have enough food or they need to go out to get food. Every animal is aware of that. Every animal feels hunger. Every animal feels thirst, etc. The question is, do they feel happy or sad when they are experiencing negative stimuli, or positive emotions when they're feeling positive stimuli. That's where things become a little more iffy, murky. But sentience is a pretty broad word, so that's why it's annoying when I hear people say, chimpanzees are sentient. Yeah, earthworms are probably sentient, depending on where you want to split that hair, and all mammals and birds and reptiles are sentient. And it's pretty firmly argued that even fish who don't have nociceptors are sentient. It's not the biggest issue to analyze an animal with. It's pretty bare bones as far as that goes when it comes to determining the mental state of another living thing. In fact, I'm not going to go too deep into this, but I mean, it could even be argued to some degree that plants are sentient. If there's a forest fire in some species, they'll use chemical signals to one another to drop their seeds, their fruits, nuts, what have you, in order to preserve the next generation. Whether this is purely just a chemical reaction to the heat or some kind of sensory response, that's debatable. So sentience, not that special. Now let's move on to sapience. Sapience is sort of the narrowest. I know it's weird that we're going from the broadest to the narrowest, but that's because self-awareness is it's just too interesting, and I got to save it for last. Sapience, on the flip side, it means that you're able to think about things. You're actually able to gauge the value of something on an emotional level. It's not the same as sentience in the least, and that's why it annoys me whenever those three things get confused, particularly sapience and sentience, because sentience, it can be applied to most things. It can be applied to most animals. Yeah, like the obvious example would be H. sapiens, which is us. We tend to think of ourselves in many respects as the only sapient creatures because, well, not only is it in the name, but it's so firmly pronounced. I mean, how do you prove that an animal is sapient? There are lots of tests, but how do you prove a person is sapient? Well, you could just ask them. No other creature on Earth can that apply to. Just by answering that question, you're illustrating awareness. You're illustrating that you're able to contemplate a question. That's not something you can do with just about any other animal. You know, we love dogs. Dogs are intelligent. Dogs are clearly sentient. But a dog, if you ask them, you know, who's a good boy, they don't think about, you know, what does that mean? What's the ethics of being a good boy? Like they don't contemplate their environment. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not intelligent. You know, one of the most interesting things to me, one of my favorite things to watch dogs do is when they're playing, either indoors or outdoors, and there's an object, usually a house, building, or wall of the rooms, that will occlude their view. And it's interesting to see two dogs chase one another, and at some point there's this really wonderful aha moment for one of the dogs where they realize, if I go the opposite direction and wait around the corner, I can catch up with the other animal that I'm playing with, and it'll surprise them. And it's obvious that they're thinking about that. They're taking their surroundings and they're applying it to a scenario abstractly before they implement it. And this is something that you tend to see with social predators. In a previous video I mentioned that one of the reasons why humans developed intelligence was because it wasn't just because we had meat to eat. It was also in order to acquire meat. It's pretty obvious because in order to be a predator, you have to at least be faster, stronger, or smarter. Usually you have to be smarter than a prey animal. There's more incentive to be clever. There's more incentive to outsmart an animal that only has to worry about running from a predator and eating grass. Those are its two dilemmas in life. You know, how am I going to find food? Oh, it's right beneath me. How are we going to get away from that predator? Oh, well, let's just run. It'll only get one of us. That's not a deeply intelligent issue. It's not something that's going to create a competitive scenario where intelligence is going to manifest. Whereas with social predators, that does happen because you have to cooperate with other members of your species in order to establish tactics that will bring down a prey animal. And you see this with lions, and you see this with wolves, which obviously runs down the line to dogs. Other predators that are solitary can convey intelligence as well. If a cephalopod was an herbivore, it probably would not be as intelligent. Now, there are exceptions to this, which we will get into in a minute. But generally speaking, being a social predator, and you see this with the dog play example that I was mentioning, is while they're playing, they're sharpening their hunting skills, and you see this remarkable intelligence. But it's not the same thing as contemplating things. It's not the same as, oh, okay, case in point, sentience, you burn your hand, like I mentioned before. And, you know, you're aware it's not good, you're in pain. Thinking about it, actually having the thoughts of, I'm unhappy because my hand hurts. I will cease being unhappy when my hand ceases to hurt. That takes a level of abstraction that a dog isn't going to understand. They're not. That's unfortunate to some people, but it's just the nature of life. You know, different animals have different levels of understanding. So cause and effect, abstract thoughts regarding what the future will be like, you know, not just being in the moment, those are elements of sapience. actually contemplating cause and effect, contemplating what you're feeling, the state you're in. And we have experiments that gauge sapience, and there's a surprising diversity among sapient animals. That's what I find interesting, is intelligence and sapience, there's not the biggest overlap, especially with regard to what I was talking about earlier, because if we look at sapient animals, chimpanzees, which are largely herbivorous, but they do go on hunting parties, which could play a role, but most importantly, they are social. That's really important. I can't think of any off the top of my head. I mean, I'm not saying they don't exist at all, but I can't think of too many sapient non-social animals. The only exception maybe would be cephalopods, because they're not social. But and with regard to them, the reason why they evolved such intelligence is in some ways coincidental. Like, it almost happened by chance, because even though they have to be clever to disguise themselves and to ambush their prey, they're not social, they don't live very long, and a lot of it was a consequence of all those limbs have different different nerve bundles that run through them, and just controlling them, just having the proper coordination necessitated a more complicated brain. That's really you look at some of the relatives, you look at a snail and you look at an octopus, and talk about a difference in intelligence. It's kind of staggering. And a lot of that, like I said, stems from just the nervous system layout of those animals. It just happened to require that. But most interesting among the sapient was a social herbivore. That's where things get interesting. Dolphins, social predators. Wolves, which are not sapient, but still, we're talking about intelligence in addition to that. Social predators. But elephants are incredibly intelligent, to such a point that if humans were absent from the earth, I halfway wonder if maybe they would be the dominant species in a gazillion years. That is hyperbole, just so you know. Both ends, not just the time, but also the possibility. Because their intelligence and their understanding of cause and effect, their understanding of abstractions like past and present, future, their understanding of even death has been observed and noted to such a degree that it is truly staggering. It's astonishing. Other cetaceans, I mentioned dolphins, also show surprising levels of intelligence and possibly sapience. And in their instance, the pressure to outcompete prey is not present. Case in point would be filter feeding cetaceans like humpback whales. And some of that could just be neuron count. I mean, really, in order for one part of such a massive brain to communicate to the other part, you would need a dense inlay of neurons between then and there. And as a result, intelligence can almost spontaneously spring from sort of a setup like that. And now we're going to move on to the most interesting. It's really, the thing to take home here is going to be the difference between these terms, but this just absolutely amazes me. And that is the self-awareness. Self-awareness is the only way we've objectively really been able to gauge it has been the mirror test. And all sapient animals pass the mirror test. Every single one of them. So that's knocked out of the park right there. Humans, elephants, chimps, things like that. But not all sapient animals, all sapient animals are self-aware, but not all self-aware animals are sapient, and that's just absolutely interesting to me. In order to perceive yourself as an individual, in order to recognize yourself and think, that's me, you'd think that would absolutely require sapience. It would absolutely require an understanding of abstraction and the ability to think, the ability to sort of pull yourself inside your mind and consider things. But it's not. In the case of the mirror test, as I said, all sentient animals pass the mirror test because you need to sensorily be able to perceive yourself. All sapient animals pass the mirror test. But there's a lot of animals that are sentient but not sapient that did in fact pass the mirror test. And some that are debatably not sentient, which is why, one of the reasons why I argue that invertebrates pass. Incidentally, for those of you who don't know, the mirror test is an experiment wherein usually within a group of animals, but not always, scientists will take a marker and draw a circle on one side of the animal's face. And if the animal passing that mirror realizes that they're looking at themselves, they will notice the dot, notice that it's not supposed to be there, and attempt to remove it. That's what tends to happen. Sometimes they're so intelligent that they understand that the mirror, over time, is a mirror image, and therefore they have to do the reverse. I remember being a very little kid and looking in the mirror and trying to figure that out, brushing my hair for the first time. I remember this is backwards, and of course now it's second nature. But it's just interesting how a small child's mind works, and you have to adapt to your environment. But anyway, the most interesting of these, again, you take a dolphin, you put a marker spot on it, it sees itself, it plays in front of the mirror, actually will make faces because it's amused, but then when it sees that mark, it will wipe it off. Dogs, not so much. You put a dog in front of a mirror, they will often growl at it or approach it because they think it's another dog. Elephants, they wipe off the mark. But here's where things get interesting. There are invertebrates who pass the mirror test, and even fish who pass the mirror test. I don't know why I'm putting fish below invertebrates. That's kind of, I guess I'm biased. But case in point of an example of a presumably non-sapient animal would be magpies. It's a bird. We know that all the corvids are very intelligent. There was even a China, Illinois episode about that where the was it crows or ravens that enrolled in college and became engineers, but they have passed the mirror test. We don't know about sapiens, but I think they probably are as far as that goes. But it's harder to test in birds. But most interestingly, in addition to birds, there are, I think, one species of fish that passed the test. In other words, they put a mark on it, it swam in front of the mirror, it realized it was looking at itself, and cleaned the mark off. So wow. But most interestingly, and this is one of the reasons why I argue that the way we gauge insects is we have a huge bias against them, and we tend to believe that they're just automatons. But at least 3 species, and think how many species of insects there are in the world. It would be very difficult to test them all. But 3 species of ants. People drew the mark. These ants are in a group. They're passing by. One sees its reflection, notes that it is looking at itself, and cleans the mark off of its own body. Bear in mind, it's not attempting to clean the reflection. It is attempting to clean its own face upon seeing its own reflection. Now, is this study flawed? I think that's very plausible. For starters, ants really... Here's the biggest issue I have with the mirror test. It requires visual interaction, and ants don't have the best vision. They use chemoreception, what we would call smell, but it's a little different because they use antennae instead of a nose. But that's their main method of interacting with the world on a sensory level. So, kind of a flawed experiment in that sense. I wish that we could... I wonder if this has been attempted actually with mantids, because they're very visual, or dragonflies for that matter. Probably, and they probably failed, but maybe they haven't. But interestingly enough, these ants engaged in self-grooming behavior in the presence of the reflection. Could be a flawed study. Maybe they chemically perceived something was on their face and took steps accordingly, and it just happened to be in front of a mirror. But I'd like to think that the scientists that did that took steps to prevent that. Thing to take home here, sentience is sensory interaction with your environment, requires some level of intellectual understanding of your surroundings, but it's extended to most animals, all vertebrates, and lots of invertebrates, and I would extend it absolutely to arthropods that are not necessarily given that privilege according to everyone. On the flip side, sapience requires an intellectual understanding of abstractions, past, present, future, emotional responses, I am sad because, I am happy because, and so forth. And then lastly, self-awareness means that you are able to recognize yourself as an individual rather than just sort of existing in your own. You're able to recognize yourself. You're able to understand you are you. A dog associates whatever name you give it with itself, but it's not going to respond to its reflection. So I hope that clears up those three terms. Any questions about it, let me know, because, like I said, it is a muddled issue. It's a murky subject because you're dealing with a lot of subjective things and a lot of things that are really difficult to test, as I just illustrated with ants in the self-awareness mirror test, who passed it. 3 species, I think. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you all next time. Bye.